Why, that's crazy. Impossible.
The word impossible, Mr. Booth, is only found in the dictionary of fools.
Now, there are many detractors of the black hole, and most of the debate comes from those criticizing the science of the film, and their complaints are valid. However, as I touched on in my second video, this film is about spirituality rather than science, and invokes the style of classic science fiction films of Forbidden Planet, Them, The Day the Earth Stood Still, The Outer Limits, and The Twilight Zone. I don't see this film trying to be as realistic as Contact, Interstellar, or 2001, so it is time to take a look at the life and death of this film in regards to the many religious subtexts found everywhere in it. Even before going aboard the Cygnus, we hear lines denoting images of hell.
My God. Right out of Dante's Inferno.
Every time I see one of those things, I expect to spot some guy in red with horns and a pitchfork.
It's a monster, all right.
Even seemingly casual observations are linked with religious things.
Like a tree on Christmas morning.
When we get to the bridge, note the control panels look like stained glass windows, and the crew manning stations look like monks, giving more religious vibes. Maximilian was in fact based off the satanic creature in Crimson from Fantasia, and the makers are on record stating that the red robot is literally a representation of the devil. After his initial introduction, Reinhardt is wearing black and red, making it clear that the crew of the Palomino has entered a sort of hell before literally going into hell. The calmest and level-headed scientist of the film even refers to knowledge as analogous to touching the hand of God.
On a glorious pilgrimage, straight into what may be the mind of God.
And the man most representing the devil in the film spouts Bible verses as well.
And darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters.
Then, that same scientist is tempted under the spell of said man, as if he is under a spell, ignoring all warning signs until he wakes up at the end of the film. You cannot go 10 minutes of this movie without running into something supporting this subtext, and it is critical for the narration of the movie because it tries to blend spirituality and science in a way I had never seen in a movie up to 1979. Execution can always be debated, but those that hate this movie for its science failures alone really miss the point of this movie. The ending of this film is hugely religious and doesn't hide that fact, and we will explore it when we cover the end of this film. I also want to remind you that a spiritual ending was always the thought, even though Disney was worried about that, because earlier concepts, like the Sistine Chapel, were explored and secured before filming. However, it did not work out. So all these scenes with religious suggestive dialogue and visual symbols are simply the foreshadows for the overall context of the film, like
David and Goliath, a classic confrontation.
The references are simply everywhere, and it's very different than most science fiction films. Anyways, upon arriving to the bridge, there is a moment in the novel where Kate tries to broadcast to other robots, but can't connect with any of them. Obviously, she can't because they are pretty much zombified humans. Yet she does not detect Maximilian, and it's Holland who spots the droid. After digging into this, I discovered that Max and the other robots do not have the ability to communicate with Kate because they are less sophisticated robots who do not have the ability to broadband with Kate. This information was easily found in the novel, as well as fan sites. Now, Reinhardt has logical reasons for not responding to the Palomino's request as they approached, or disarming them when they arrived. He is, after all, against orders to return home. Who knows what their intentions were, so even if Reinhardt wasn't paranoid, which he is, it would be prudent for him to not communicate, and if they boarded, disarm whoever it is to control their intentions, if it was negative in any way. Instead of going through any of this in the movie, the choice to have Reinhardt mocking Captain Holland was used instead.
You failed to reply.
Did I have to reply? Charlie?
This momentary jab denoted that Reinhardt was watching their every move and showed that he was in control, which is effective as well. Shell is simply a commanding presence in this performance. He is so subtle in so many things in the way he expresses his character. There are many scenes I love with him in it, but the scenes I like are more subtle, such as this one, where he shows his paranoia when Captain Holland whispers to Kate. Look at his facial expression. It's just perfect.
Communication problems aside, he took an awful long time to show any lights. Be careful.
I know.
The book added more character to Reinhardt and Booth, stating that Reinhardt was cautious of Booth because 20 years ago, Booth wrote some very harsh articles in the past, and Reinhardt referred to his writing methodology as cutting and clumsy. Booth would defend himself by saying that he just wrote the words, and others cut the person he wrote about if cutting happened. For the rest of their time together, Booth would constantly throw jabs at Reinhardt, almost trying to antagonize the scientist, and it would be Kate that would stay behind on purpose to be between the two men to maintain civil relations until they got off the ship. We do see this feud represented in the film because you will see Booth pushing Reinhardt's buttons, and his ego can't resist flaring when it occurs. Also, the next time you watch the film, watch Ernest Borgnine closely. You will often see him smirking whenever Reinhardt is complimented in any way, as if it's ridiculous to throw accolades at such an arrogant man. This was always evident in the film, and yet we never knew why. And because of this, I mentioned the extra scenes in the novel to give it understanding and context. The book would even go on to state that Kate remembered when her father left Earth, and Reinhardt gave a speech inaugurating their departure. So it is clear and obvious that Reinhardt recognizes her and they remember each other. Now, the eagerness of Durant to become caretaker of Reinhardt's material would have been so impactful for this character if the film established his disappointment over a failed mission at the beginning of the movie. Thus, receiving Reinhardt's research would have turned a failed mission into a successful one and would have given the crew the ability to tout that they were the ones to discover the Cygnus after 20 years missing. Little of this is directly explored in the movie, though. We see Reinhardt wearing a Legion of Merit around his neck, which is a military award, even though Reinhardt was never in the military. Whether this was done just for decoration or it was to actually represent the actual award, I can't really say. During dinner, we do see Reinhardt trying to antagonize Harry by asking if his paper is still on strike, which Harry brushes off.
You're still writing for the same paper?
The same.
Still on strike?
This line was done by Shell because at the time, in New York City, during 1978, a newspaper strike was actually going on, and it shut down some big papers for a few weeks. Thus, it's mentioned in the movie. During the shooting contest, Captain Starr is cocky because he's the second best shot on the ship. In the kids' storybook and comic adaptations, they state that Starr's medal is a sharpshooter award. After Bob tells Vincent about his mistreatment, Vincent purposely shoots this medal to humiliate Starr to give Bob revenge, which is expressed in the film. Now, I'm going to take a moment to go into Bob here, and according to the novel and comic, he was deactivated while the rest of the crew was reprogrammed. When he came back online, he saw what happened and pretended to be reprogrammed to retain his personality and keep a low profile. Vincent is the first ray of hope he sees, and thus spills the beans when he gets a chance to be alone with him. Bob's accent was from being programmed at Houston, which is hinted at by Vincent in the film.
I see by your markings you're from the old 2-8, programmed in Houston.
Now, I'm going to be upfront. Even though I can watch this film with kitty goggles on and enjoy it immensely, I can see how Bob's voice can take someone out of the movie, and since I always like different takes, I invited someone who just watched the movie for the first time since the early 1980s, and she remembered liking the black hole back then. However, when she saw the movie recently, Bob and Vincent were just too much for her. So here's her take.
I have fond memories of this film from when I was a kid, but what I remember the most was actually the spaceship itself. I must have mentally blocked out the robots because now as an adult I can't take them seriously. I can't take googly-eyed floating trash cans either with a Shakespearean accent or one of Taggart from Blazing Saddles. And look, I love Slim Pickens, but there is no way I can watch the film and place those Mickey Mouse-eyed goofy motherfuckers in the same universe. I understand Disney wanted to make a film geared more towards young adults, but they needed to pick a side. You just can't expect me to take the whole of the film, which can be quite morbid, and have two craft project buckets as sidekicks. The fact that I don't remember anything about them from my childhood shows that they had little impact on the film and probably would have been better off without it.
And now for something completely different.
What kind of hiding spot is this? Moving on. Now, after Reinhardt leaves the dinner, we finally begin to see some of the underbelly of Mr. Booth. Since the start of the movie, he has basically egged Reinhardt on, and now he's talking tough about taking over the ship.
I'm telling you, we could all be heroes.
We could also be dead.
Then, Booth begins showing a two-faced mentality that is most likely brought on by fear and self-preservation after he hears what happened to everyone on the ship. He goes from talking the talk to suggesting abandoning fellow crewmates.
If we wait for Alex, we may be too late.
Then, he actually does abandon his fellow crewmates like a sniveling weasel. This, of course, results in his own death. This makes Booth one of the better characters in the film because his motives and allegiance can be questioned throughout the film, long after seeing the movie multiple times. Now, when the mask is removed by Durant, the person underneath is none other than director Gary Nelson. The scene where Durant tries to block Maximilian with all of Reinhardt's lost research is poignant because not only does it express that knowledge can't save him, but that Reinhardt's research is now gone, and his dreams of being great and remembered are no more. The scene is really good, and although blood would be everywhere, the thing that holds it together is Anthony Perkins' portrayal, which is dynamite. Since there is no blood, the filmmakers needed to hide his chest as he fell, which does not have a single mark on it. To compensate for this, they did big sparks as he fell to obscure his chest, which is somewhat effective. When the scene was originally filmed, Maximilian was supposed to move in and simply kill Alex. However, it was changed on the spot so Perkins would use the book as a shield. That was an improvisational thing on the set. I loved it. I just had this visual of Tony holding this book with all the great knowledge that he needs in front of him to protect himself, and Maximilian just grinds him up. For me, one of Shell's most interesting scenes in the movie was another improv where he goes up to Kate and says,
Protect me from Maximilian.
Is Reinhardt being truthful or not when he whispers to Kate? Clearly Max is physically powerful and dangerous, and yet Reinhardt, being the genius he is, would have programmed a kill switch to maintain control of the robot. So this begs the question, is Reinhardt playing more mind games and pulling the strings, which is what I think, or is he a prisoner of his own creation, which he can't escape from? This links to the end of the film, where he falls into the black hole and Maximilian finds him. To be honest, I think it is both, because we know for a fact that Reinhardt really liked Durant and appreciated his adoration. I don't think he wanted him killed in any way. This means that Max can work separately from Reinhardt. However, I go back and forth on this take, and it just makes the film more interesting on repeat viewings. So, like we have said in many videos, this is one of those things you will have to decide for yourself. When Kate is saved by Captain Holland, there is a quick pecking kiss, and it's the only hint of romance beside their holding hands on the probe ship at the end. It was a completely ignored story point, as I have earlier discussed, but it is in the movie despite being ignored. Originally, the prop laser guns had a light at the tip of them, and when a trigger was pressed, it would create a light that the animators would use to determine where the blasts would go. The problem was the actors would sometimes miss their cues, or they were just playing around, not aiming properly. As a result, they would remove the lights and just animate them the way they thought best in post. When the agricultural roof is destroyed in the garden and the characters were avoiding being sucked into space, it took 2 full weeks to film these scenes. We were lucky that nobody got hurt. A lot of people were wearing goggles except us. I remember a couple of times going to the makeup department to get my eyes washed out. They flocked us like Christmas trees. Yeah, that was pretty trying to get that off. The only real injury in the film was Forrester, which happened later during the escape scenes. I managed not to duck, and I got whacked in the face with a piece of swinging debris. It wasn't much of a cut, but it cut me somewhere in my eyebrow, and they immediately rushed me to a doctor who sewed it up. The next thing I know, I'm back on the set. It was bingo bango, not worth much time. You can see this scar clearly during the end scene in the probe ship. When the meteor comes rolling down towards the crew, it's classic sci-fi in that it's unbelievable but fun. The pressure and atmosphere, wherever this thing impacted the ship, would have sucked out the crew into space, but if you can get beyond that fact, you can enjoy the scene. The hardest part for me to take when watching this movie is the probe ship scene. As we have seen earlier, the probe ship is parked on the outside of the vessel and is connected by a boarding hallway, and when our trio of heroes, along with Vincent, try to get inside, they are completely outside in the atmosphere of the rim of the black hole. Perhaps someone can argue that there are anti-gravity or atmosphere shields around the ship, but that is really wishful thinking of a fan trying to make sense of it. I don't like writing the script or story to explain things away unless there is material to support such things. Again, this is like Flash Gordon jumping straight down from a ship and landing on another while moving at fast speeds. I know I'm not supposed to take this too seriously, it's just a family adventure, but this one, like the Gordon jump, is just too campy and silly for me to stomach. It doesn't kill the movie for me, but as an adult, it's hard to dismiss. It's just something that annoys me, and I'm the type of person that will list the good and the bad, right, wrong, or indifferent, no matter how I feel about it. The filming of the crew in the probe at the end of the film was shot using a rolling device, which was nothing more than revolving walls around a stationary cast. The ending denotes the black hole to be a literal hell, with Reinhardt Judge standing over acolytes around flames. If you notice, the crew of the Cygnus are in a hellish landscape, and you have to ponder how they could deserve such a fate. They were slaves in life after the reprogramming of the ship, and now they are seemingly slaves here as well. Despite this, the Palomino crew flies past the Cygnus wreckage and finds salvation, which apparently ends with an angel and a gate to heaven. Some theorists suggest that the image of the angel guiding them is actually Kate, who astral projects herself, leading the crew to safety. The ending turned into something like out of Fantasia. Yeah, they went trippy. Nelson's original concept for the ending was to have the camera go into Yvette's eyes to see Adam created, and then the camera goes further to reveal the shot of the Sistine Chapel. Peter Ellenshaw did travel to Rome and shot this ceiling. However, at the last moment, Disney backed away from the idea. We were getting very close to the putting the picture to bed. Ron Miller and the heads of the studio didn't want anything to be that religious, so that ended up on the cutting room floor. Despite this, the ending was still religious. However, the novel had a completely different take of the ending and had none of the religious undertones because Alan Dean Foster didn't know anything about it. At the end, the Cygnus is destroyed, and as the crew of the Palomino goes through the black hole, the probe ship is being destroyed. Kate reaches out to the crew on the probe ship with her mind, and they all join consciously as one entity, it seems, as their ship and bodies are crushed. After their death, they awake with everlasting life that spans the galaxy. So the question to ask here is, did they die? Well, your opinion is what matters the most, but if you want mine, the answer I always saw was yes, absolutely. Everyone died at the end of this film, and it is literal hell heaven or hell experienced, even though they are shown coming out the other side of the black hole, flying unscathed towards a planet. I've never been able to see this any other way, but that doesn't mean my thoughts in the matter are right. With the film's release and little momentum, Disney's hope for the film was dashed. The creative film was met with lackluster fanfare in comparison of other science fiction films of that time, and to stress the nature of Disney back in the 70s, there was never talk of sequels from concept to conclusion. Disney did ponder the idea of doing an ongoing weekly series after the movie came out, but this did not coalesce. Several years later, I would read in the trades about a Black Hole 2 or something, but it never came about. Decades later, Tron Legacy director Joseph Kosinski wanted to develop a Black Hole remake, and if you watch Tron Legacy, you will see the Black Hole poster in Sam's room and a Vincent figure. The script was written by John Spates and was considered dark, but once Disney bought Lucasfilm, Disney ignored the idea and went after Star Wars instead. I'm glad a remake hasn't happened yet because modern Hollywood just can't seem to get any remake right. And there's a classic charm that this film has that I don't think can be modernized without a true Black Hole fan, which seems to be against Hollywood's way where filmmaking is concerned these days. A focused, knowledgeable writer would be needed for such a remake, one who isn't just copying dictation from a dumb studio who has no idea what it's doing. I don't want a remake of this movie, period. The Black Hole does have its campy moments, and I actually derive enjoyment from seeing wires holding up the actors and robots throughout the movie. I love the charm and simplicity of this movie in the same manner I love Wizard of Oz or my favorite old films with Charlie Chaplin like Modern Times and Gold Rush. To be honest, if this film came out during the 90s or 2000s, I would have most likely just seen it and not appreciated it to the level I do today. Back then, it was a sight to behold and something special. Today, it would be just another special effects film, which is why this is one of those movies I would never recommend it to someone unless they were into classic science fiction. This film was made by a studio that was only making family films up to that point, and they tried valiantly. Though it was geared to adults, they tried to entice children, and like many movies in the 70s, it challenged their audience, whether young or old, to use their brain when watching it, and I applaud this fully. The action is very spread out, so a typical moviegoer will most likely not enjoy it. It's a niche film, but it's a niche right up my alley, and I love it, warts and all. In the end, the director of the film said it best. I think The Black Hole holds up well. It just was a lot of work, a lot of time, and a lot of effort to make a pretty good movie. Not a great movie, not some outstanding movie, but a pretty good movie that will, no matter what, probably stick around for a long time. His assessment is perfectly aligned with mine. And that ends another video. Next up is Jaws 2, and boy was that a troubled production. We will end our coverage of Jaws 2 with a special episode covering the disastrous Jaws 3 and 4 films as one video. After that, it will be time for The Truman Show before continuing our John Carpenter series with Escape from New York, and then we will dive into Alien vs. Predator. Instead of our normal kooky ending, I wanted to take a moment to address my subs and fans out there. We are so very pleased that you are with us, and we've grown very fast for a channel that has only been around for a year and a half. But we wanted to note that since we covered films like Jaws and Airplane, the YouTube algorithm has pretty much dropped this channel. We know this because in our audience section, you can see our channel is not linked to others, and the recommendations for our channel is very limited. We understand we have a unique perspective and way of covering movies, and that is probably why it can't be linked with a standard review channel. We have every intention to stay the course and carve out a niche for ourselves on this platform, but we would like a call to action to anyone willing and ask if you feel compelled, please share our content, as it will help force our content out there. Growth is our goal, and we have a lot of films planned, but anything you can do to help will be appreciated. Even if one view occurs from one share, we are thankful, and we look forward to seeing you in our next video. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week. We also want to wish you a very happy holidays for you and your family. If you like what you see here, click like and subscribe. Super thanks helps, but sharing helps the most. We really appreciate your time.